Hi, I'm back with the Midnight Rider. Remember when we left off, Hannah had just given some information to Mr. Revere, and she asked him to remain quiet and not tell anybody that she gave him the information. So, we're going to move on to chapter 30. A stranger in the tunnel. Uh-oh. Remember that secret tunnel? Let's see what happens. Hannah unhitched Promise and tried to climb on his back, but the bulky clothes made it difficult, since this time she did not have a step. 3 boys watched and crowed at her from the opposite side of the street. They were standing under a lamp, and she recognized them as the surly young men who had sung parodies about General Gage when she and Catherine walked home from church that Sunday morning. "Can't mount your horse?" the leader of the group called out. "Did you sell your saddle?" another hooted. Hannah tapped Promise's knees, and the horse knelt on his front legs. "Good boy," she said in Hans's voice as she climbed on his back. "You remember what Papa taught you, so I could mount you when I was a child." She patted Promise's neck. There were murmurs of awe from across the street. "Did you see that? Must be a trained war horse from England." "Could that be the Midnight Rider?" the biggest youth asked. "That horse is black as midnight." "Hey, you, wait!" called one of the lads as the group started toward her. Hannah urged Promise into a canter and away from the rowdy boys, thankful they were not on horseback. But when she approached Marlborough Street and looked back, she could see them by the tavern, talking to soldiers and pointing her way. They would almost certainly betray her to the soldiers. Those troublemakers had no sense of loyalty to either the British or the Americans. More likely they were looking for a reward for turning in the Midnight Rider. "Fly, Promise!" Hannah called in her male voice. The horse leaped forward in a gallop. Once out of sight, she reined him in to an acceptable trot and headed back to Valley Acres. Back at the barn, the stable boy was snoring on a pile of hay. He opened his eyes briefly, then nodded back to sleep again. Hannah wiped Promise down and removed his bridle. "There, my good boy," she said. "Stay warm in here until we ride again." Out on the streets once more, she pulled her hat over her forehead to shade her face. There was no commotion, so she assumed the soldiers were not looking for her. Nevertheless, she picked up her pace and hurried down Marlborough Street to School Street and the alley. She walked slowly toward the tunnel entrance, staying in the shadows, hoping the soldiers would not come searching for her. The large boulder blocked her view of the trap door. Hannah stopped suddenly. There were footprints on the fresh snow. Big footprints. They couldn't have been Will's or Caleb's. The tracks were clear, as if imprinted by well-made leather shoes, not like something the boys wore. The prince headed to the hatch. She was relieved to see the drifting snow had covered her own earlier footprints. But had they been visible when the person entered the passageway? Did she dare go back through the tunnel? She did not have time to decide what to do, for at that very moment she heard the grating sound of the trapdoor opening. Quickly she ducked behind the boulder, brushing snow over her fresh footprints with her gloved hands. Shivering, she crouched close to the ground, as far behind the rock as she could get, praying she would not be seen. She heard the door close, and then the soft footsteps on the snow. She waited silently, listening. Then, cautiously, she peeked out around the boulder. A man was standing under a street lamp. He was tall and gaunt, with graying hair gathered in a pigtail at the back of his neck. She watched as he straightened his coat, brushed it off, and then pulled on some gloves. The stranger walked up the street with long strides and disappeared down one of the narrow lanes. Hannah had seen this man before. It was on her first day at the Province House, when he had gone into General Gage's private office. There was somewhere else that she had seen this person too. But where? In any case, this must have been the person that Caleb had seen emerge from the underground passage months ago. Hannah realized with a shudder that if she had crept through the tunnel a moment earlier, she would have met the man face on. Suddenly, Hannah heard a commotion. Soldiers on horseback galloped onto Marlborough Street. "Where is that Midnight Rider?" "Those boys said he couldn't be far from here." "When we get him, we'll bathe him in tar and feathers. Then we'll hang him from their damned Liberty Tree." In a panic, Hannah pulled open the hatch and hurled herself down the stone steps into the darkness of the tunnel. Chapter 1. A Gift of Friendship. Early the next morning, Hannah raced to the stable to tell Caleb about the stranger in the tunnel. but the stable was filled with soldiers urgently coming and going, and with a harsh look and shake of his head, Caleb warned her to leave. The province house was also filled with officers. Hannah overheard talk that Paul Revere had rushed to Portsmouth and set the Whigs into turmoil. Actual fighting had occurred at Fort William and Mary, as the few British officers on duty there bravely defended the fort. 2 days later, when an express rider from Governor Wentworth of New Hampshire arrived at the province house, begging for troops to be sent immediately to Portsmouth, General Gage ordered another ship, the HMS Canco, to head there. "We may be at war," Catherine whispered to Hannah. Later that morning, when Hannah was filling pitchers at the well, Caleb joined her. "Your midnight visit to Paul Revere caused quite a stir, Hannah. He rode off the next morning to warn the Whigs in Portsmouth that ships were heading to Fort William and Mary." He poured himself a cup of icy water from the bucket. "But your report was a bit off." "What do you mean?" Had she given false information to the Committee of Safety? The HMS Somerset wasn't heading to Portsmouth. It was returning from England with more troops. The Canco was the ship commissioned to Portsmouth. Hannah was silent. She had only heard the name of the Somerset in garbled conversation. Had she sent Paul Revere on a useless race? "But I know for certain General Gage and his officers were planning to reinforce the fort. I heard it with my own ears." "You heard right. But Gage's troops were to get there a few days later. Oh, don't worry. It's just as well that Revere brought the news as early as he did. The New Hampshire militia, more than 1,000 strong, attacked the fort and took away all the munitions. When the British Marines finally arrived, the gunpowder and cannon were already hidden." Caleb chuckled. "And the latest news is this. When General Gage sent Admiral Graves and his Marines out on the Canco, they got jammed in shallow water. They're stuck aground, Hannah, and totally helpless." Hannah shook her head in disbelief. Had our message caused all of this chaos? "Did you hear they actually came to blows at the Portsmouth fort?" Caleb asked. "You might have started a war, Hannah." "No, don't say such a thing." Hannah had a sick feeling in her stomach, and she recalled Mrs. Gage's words. "I beg, go not to arms." "The things that are happening are not silly jokes, Caleb." "It's all for freedom instead of tyranny," Caleb said comfortingly. "You said yourself that freedom is everything." "It is," Hannah agreed with a nod. "Will Mr. Revere be arrested?" "Everyone knows it was Revere who warned the Whigs in Portsmouth. Loyalists are saying he should be hung from the Liberty Tree." Hannah shivered. Then she told Caleb about the stranger in the tunnel. "I've seen him before, coming from General Gage's office, and somewhere else too, but I can't recall where." She described the man as best she could, but Caleb was unable to identify him. "We'd better not use the tunnel for a while," he said. "Where is Will?" Hannah asked. "He should be warned." "He left for Salem with promise early this morning. He'll be back in a few days." Caleb stood up. "I'll tell Will about the tunnel when I see him." Winter set in, with snowfalls and icy winds. Children played in the snow, sledding on every available slope, often barely missing being hit by oncoming sleighs. The province house was decorated with holly and boughs of evergreens. Candles gleamed in every window, day and night. But despite the preparations and forced joviality, everyone knew that the Portsmouth alarm was a humiliation to General Gage and Admiral Graves. To make matters worse, other New England communities had followed suit and absconded with ammunition from their local forts and armories before Gage's men could secure them. One morning, Meg and Hannah were allowed to ride on a one-horse open sleigh around the town. Hannah in her mother's red cape, and Meg in a dark green velvet with an arm-rind collar, sat side by side, bundled in a rug. Joseph drove the horse through the mall of bare trees at the Common, and then around Beacon Hill and down to the waterfront. Ships strained at the docks where they were tied, icicles hanging from their masts and spars. On the return, Meg had Joseph stop at a clothing store, where she purchased a flowered reticule with a shiny, ruby-colored tassel. "This is the perfect Christmas gift for Aunt Margaret. The popular French Empire styles are slim and clinging," she explained to Hannah, "and pockets on her dresses bulge and spoil the lines. So the French have created these pretty little bags to hold money. or combs, or whatever a woman needs to carry about. I'm sure Mrs. Gage will be delighted with her gift, Hannah said. For General Gage, Meg purchased a tooled leather belt with silver trim. Are you giving gifts for Christmas, Hannah? Meg asked. No, Miss Meg. I come from a Puritan family. We have never celebrated the Christmas holidays. Oh, you poor thing. You've missed so much, Meg exclaimed. Hannah had been taught that the Christmas celebration was a substitute for the ancient Roman celebration of Saturnalia, a festival of wild revelry that took place at the winter solstice. At one time, fines had been imposed in the Massachusetts Bay Colony upon families that celebrated Christmas. Hannah had never felt that she was missing anything at all. Hannah, I shall give you your first Christmas present, Meg told her. No, Miss Meg, please don't. Do not say no to me, Meg ordered merrily. I insist. That evening, Mrs. Gage called Hannah and Catherine to her chamber. You've both been faithful and hard-working servants, and General Gage and I would like you to accept a small token of our appreciation. She handed an envelope to each of them. Thank you, Madame, Catherine said with a deep curtsy. Hannah wondered if this was a Christmas present. If so, she should not accept it. Still, Mrs. Gage had said it was for their hard work and faithfulness, so she had also curtsied and said, Thank you, Madame. Hannah and Catherine each found a 10-pound note inside the envelope. What shall you do with this money, Hannah? Catherine asked. I believe I shall buy a new dress. I'm not in need right now. I might waste the money if I spend it, Hannah answered, recalling the Puritan saying, Willful waste makes woeful want. Meg was in a constant state of jubilation about the upcoming holidays. Hannah wondered if she had a new beau. If so, she had not said a word about him to Hannah. On Christmas Day, Hannah found a basket outside her door that was filled with ribbons of satin, lace, and even shimmering gold. A card inside read, Merry Christmas to Hannah from Miss Meg. I asked her not to give me a present, Hannah said to Catherine. I should return it. I think she would be hurt if you were to return it, Catherine said, or angry. I'm the one who should be angry. She wants everything her way, Hannah sighed. But the ribbons are lovely, aren't they? She thought about you and chose something special. Then she could give it to me another day, Hannah fingered the bouquet of ribbons. Even though I'm only a servant, she should respect my wishes. Otherwise, the gift doesn't mean anything. I think it does mean something, Catherine said. Something more than just a Christmas gift. Hannah was silent for a long moment. Then she said, What does it mean? To Meg, you are more than a servant, Hannah. Meg knows you are the best friend she's ever had. And we'll do the Strange Sabbath, page 32. A Strange Sabbath. January came and went with icy winds that froze muddy roadways into ruts. Hannah stayed inside the grounds of the Province House, wishing mightily that she could see Will and Promise. Caleb kept her informed about the goings-on, but none of them dared to use the tunnel. Meg had hoped to go to England, but General Gage felt the Atlantic Ocean was too dangerous to cross in the winter. It was decided that Meg would leave for England in the spring. Meanwhile, she made the most of the dances and entertainments that were held at the Province House, flirting away the evenings as a diversion from the boring New England winter. One Sabbath, Hannah dressed in her best gray woolen pinafore. Usually she pulled her brown ringlets over the pockmark on her cheek. But today she brushed her hair back and tied it with a rose-colored satin ribbon that Meg had given her. You look lovely, said Catherine. Hannah and Catherine walked across the cobblestone street to attend church at the Old South Meeting House. This was built as a Puritan church, Catherine told her. But to Hannah it did not seem to be a true Puritan service. Instead of a minister, the distinguished Dr. Warren, one of the Sons of Liberty, was in the pulpit. Hannah recognized him from the shadow play at Paul Revere's home. Dr. Warren was an eloquent speaker, and he appealed to the citizens to maintain order in the town. At the same time, his sermon was fiery and emotional for the cause of liberty and freedom. Hannah knows several other men she had seen at Paul Revere's house. They sat in the pulpit along with several British soldiers. How strange that they should be together. But then this was a place of worship. Surely no fighting would occur. Hannah noticed Paul Revere whispering with another man in what looked like a serious conversation. When the man looked up, Hannah gasped. It was the stranger from the tunnel. She suddenly remembered where she had seen him before. He had attended the shadow play at the Revere's house, and Caleb has identified him as Dr. Benjamin Church. Hannah had heard Dr. Church's name mentioned many times since then. He was always spoken of with such great respect as one of the most trusted of the Sons of Liberty. But Hannah was certain that this was the man that was the informant. She could hardly contain herself. She had to speak to Mr. Revere right away. Hannah fidgeted as she waited for the service to be over. She watched Dr. Church nodding his head as if in agreement with Dr. Warren's words, occasionally breaking into a smile. Yet Hannah knew in her heart that this man was not as he seemed. When the service ended and the congregation was milling about, she caught sight of Miss Phyllis Wheatley, conversing with Dr. Warren. As Dr. Warren nodded politely, Hannah saw Miss Phyllis pull a small envelope from her pocket and slip it into his hand. He placed it immediately into his inner vest pocket and walked away. Although she only saw it for an instant, Hannah felt sure that the envelope was similar to those she had delivered to Miss Phyllis for Mrs. Gage. Certainly, Mrs. Gage was not writing letters without words to Dr. Warren. She shook her head and tried to put the thought out of her mind. When Hannah turned to speak to Catherine, she was gone. As she made her way through the parishioners, she caught sight of Catherine talking intimately to her friend, Mr. Greenleaf. Catherine looked radiant as they laughed together, and Mr. Greenleaf seemed oblivious to everyone else around them. Many unusual events were taking place at the Old South on this Sabbath, but now she had to warn Mr. Revere about Dr. Church. She was searching through the crowd when someone caught her by the hand. "Hannah, I've wanted to see you," Will said. "Oh, Will, where have you been?" "I was in Salem. Friends asked for you. Old Skid and his family, Sarah Tarrant, Parson Barnyard." "Aunt Phoebe?" "I didn't speak with her. She was no part of the town meetings, being a firm Tory and all. But I did hear she and her lawyer may marry." "Marry!" Hannah burst out laughing. "I had a great pity for the poor man." "He's not poor. He's quite wealthy." "Therein lies the attraction," Hannah said with a sniff. As they made their way through the crowd to the small garden in the back of the building, Hannah noticed that Will was limping. "What's wrong with your legs?" she asked him. "When I was on the road, I had to spend a night in a stable, and a mad stallion stomped on my foot. The toes have been abscessed for a long time, and now they're turning black. I'm going to Dr. Warren tomorrow. He may do some surgery on it." "Oh, I'm so sorry." They sat together on one of the granite benches. "You look very pretty with your hair tied back like that," Will said. Instinctively, Hannah reached to pull a strand of hair over her cheek, but Will took hold of her hand. "You don't need to hide one speck of your beautiful face, Hannah," he said gently. "I've missed you, and so has Promise." Hannah felt her face flush, and she trembled. When Will finally let go of her hand, a wave of disappointment swept over her. "I did ride him one night," Hannah stammered, suddenly filled with unexpected emotions. "So I heard. The last time I saw Caleb at a Sons of Liberty meeting, he told me all about the man in the tunnel." "I know who it was, Will," she whispered, returning to her senses. "It was Dr. Church. I saw him shake hands with General Gage, and I'm positive he's the informant that tells General Gage everything that's going on with the Sons of Liberty." "No," Will said in a low voice. "In no way would he betray us. He swears on the Bible at every meeting that he will never reveal what's going on." "Haven't you heard of Judas Iscariot? He was one of the trusted 12 disciples, yet he betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. If Judas could betray Christ, couldn't Dr. Church be disloyal?" "I've heard Dr. Church speak powerfully for liberty and freedom," Will objected. "He's not a Judas." Hannah shook her head in frustration. "In the event there is a traitor among you, I've asked Mr. Revere never to disclose it was I who warned him about General Gage's plan to reinforce Fort William and Mary," Hannah said. "And I pray that you have not revealed me to anyone in the Sons of Liberty either. Mr. Revere says I am in great danger now." "Neither Caleb nor I have mentioned you to anyone, Hannah. I swear I'd depart this life before I betray you." "Oh, I do wish you would believe me," Hannah pleaded. I saw Dr. Church come out of the tunnel. It just cannot be so. It was dark. You must have seen someone who resembled him. We can't afford to have disunity in our committees, especially now, so you mustn't say anything to Mr. Revere. Hannah didn't answer. She would make no promises. They are traitors, or friends of liberty, depending on how you want to look at it. Within the royal government also, Will went on. We are not without informants ourselves. Dr. Warren is privy to someone on the uppermost levels, high in the midst of Gage's people. Whoever that may be has not revealed your turncoat, however, Hannah pointed out. There are spies everywhere, Hannah. I've heard that some redcoat discovered Promise at Valley Acres and believes he's the Midnight Rider's mount. So I've decided to bring Promise over to the river to Charleston and hide him. Mr. Hubbard will help me. Once Promise is hidden, we'll all be safe. In the meantime, you won't be able to ride. I'm sorry, Hannah, but it's all for the best. I understand. Will, I pray you will get Promise safely to Charlestown. And Will, this time she took his hand, I pray Dr. Warren will heal your injured foot. Catherine appeared at the entrance to the courtyard. Shall we leave now, Hannah? Hannah stood up. I'm coming, Catherine. She leaned over to Will and whispered, Please be aware of Dr. Church. Don't let him know that you are riding to Salem. I'll be careful, Hannah. He gave her a teasing smile. And never fear. We shall not reveal that you are the infamous Midnight Rider, Hans. Even Will's teasing couldn't draw a smile from Hannah. God be with you, Will. And with you, Hannah. And that's the end for today. I wonder what's going to happen now. So do you think, is the traitor Dr. Church? Or is Hannah wrong and it's somebody else? We'll find out.